In the prior video, we looked at some of the questions of Nietzsche's insanity and Jung's core reasoning behind Nietzsche's insanity, that he had tried to become God and was possessed by the archetype of the wise old man. We left off after Zarathustra descended down from the mountains, and we begin entering the town into the marketplace where the collective spirit of humanity lingers. When Zarathustra came into the nearest town, lying on the edge of the forest, he found many people gathered in the marketplace, for it had been promised that a rope dancer, a tightrope walker, would perform. And Zarathustra spoke thus to the people: I teach you, the overman. What is important is Zarathustra's mentioning of this rope dancer. The rope dancer, or the tightrope walker, is a common symbol throughout Thus Spoke Zarathustra, and it is one that Nietzsche also identified with, in other words, was possessed by. The rope dancer here is the first character upon entering the town that is explicitly and specifically mentioned, as Jung comments. It is nowhere clearly indicated that Zarathustra is the rope dancer, but it is perfectly obvious in the further continuation of the story, inasmuch as he is Nietzsche. I doubt very much whether Nietzsche realized it. There is, however, further on in the book, a quite irrefutable proof that he himself is the rope dancer, in the prophecy of his own fate, of which he could not have been conscious. So I think I am safe in the assumption that Nietzsche was not conscious that Zarathustra was the rope dancer. You see, if a figure like that appears in a dream, if you encounter yourself in the form of a certain person, for instance, then you can safely conclude that you are unaware of the fact that you are like that person under a certain aspect, or, if it is an animal, that you are unaware of yourself under the aspect of such an animal. You always assume it must be somebody else. So it would be quite natural if Nietzsche did not recognize that figure. But we have such dreams just in order to meet the thing in ourselves which is strange to us, and that is the reason why Nietzsche meets that aspect of himself. A sorry sort of travelling entertainer, a rope dancer. It is a very flimsy kind of profession, you know, and very risky at that. One easily slips and falls down dead. In fact, I had met a girl who told me one of her dreams which characterized Nietzsche's situation. She dreamt that she was in the clouds and entered a massive Colosseum. In the Colosseum there were giant empty thrones surrounding the edges where gods should have been but were absent. As she approached the centre, she saw Nietzsche standing before her, and in the next moment they both fell from the sky and died, so that was that. So this dream can be understood to fit Nietzsche's situation, and this will be shown as what is written during these parts of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Man is a rope stretched between the animal and the superman, a rope over an abyss, a dangerous crossing, a dangerous wayfaring, a dangerous look back, a dangerous trembling and halting. What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not a goal. What is lovable in man is that he is an overgoing and a downgoing. So after the declaration of the death of God, Nietzsche describes the situation of humanity perfectly. They are at a crossroads between their primitive nature, the animal, and the naively idealistic idea of value creation, the overman, stretched out over an abyss. He is confronted with this problem of the death of God and the confrontation with the rope dancer. Jung continues, the rope dancer is that quantity of energy which has been in the God before. This is the diminutive form of the God in him, and he is a dancer because God dances the world. That a God should be a dancer is of course a very pagan notion, and the Hindu idea is that he dances the creation of the world and its destruction. But God as a creator, as the author, the maker of things, is a Christian idea as well. So God appears now like the rope dancer who is himself Nietzsche, and the rope dancer leads an exceedingly risky existence. Therefore, through his identity with God, he is instantly forced into a heroic attitude, an attitude of possible self-destruction. He is increased beyond himself by that inflation. One could not say that this was very bad. It is the making of a hero. You see, a hero must have a large self-destructive tendency in order to be a hero. We praise a hero, and the hero contains a divine spark, or he would not be a hero. He encounters himself then as the hero, this rope dancer, but that means the maker of his own destruction. For the moment, however, the rope dancer plays no role. First, Zarathustra tries to teach the people his idea of the Superman. The idea of the Superman is, of course, the consequence of the God that is dead. For then man cannot remain man. He is lifted out of himself, because all the vital processes that were embodied in God before are now in himself, and he becomes the creator of himself, as God creates himself all the world. In the old Egyptian texts, God is the maker of his own egg, the builder of his own nest. He hatches himself out. He is the phoenix that burns itself and rises out of its own ashes. He is the God that eternally recreates himself. So whenever that inflation process gets into man, he becomes the maker of himself. Therefore Nietzsche continues now to speak about the Superman as able to create himself. Zarathustra is now the expression of man plus God. He can undo himself and create a being beyond man, supposedly a product of man and God. Then he says that all beings hitherto have created something beyond themselves, and that otherwise they would go back to the animals. What Jung means, and Nietzsche for that matter, is those people who do not create beyond themselves live a very average life according to nature. They don't individuate or reflect on themselves to go their own way from the crowd, the state, collective morality, and their instincts. They live a very unconscious life like an animal does. Nietzsche then, or Zarathustra for that matter, advocates this so-called God image who tries to teach the people to create and move beyond themselves. Within Thus Spoke Zarathustra, the collective, in other words society, also mentions they are waiting and wishing the rope dancer to perform through these passages of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. Yes, the rope dancer is Nietzsche's attempt to become the Superman. The collective naturally then want to see the Superman. They call for the rope dancer, because they cannot believe that it is possible to cross over the gulf, to walk on that thin rope over the abyss which separates them from the Superman. He should show them how one becomes a Superman. That is the urgent question. Continuing on chronologically through Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Zarathustra, after trying to teach humankind, the collective in the marketplace, ends in being misunderstood or rejected by the collective of mankind. All then takes notice, along with the collective, of the commencing act of the rope dancer. Then, however, something happened that struck every mouth silent and forced all eyes to stare, for in the meantime the tightrope walker had begun his work. He had emerged from a little door and was walking across the rope stretched between two towers, such that it hung suspended over the marketplace and the people. Just as he was at the midpoint of his way, the little door opened once again, and a colourful fellow, resembling a jester, leaped forth and hurried after the first man with quick steps. "Forward, sloth, smuggler, pale-face, or I'll tickle you with my heel. What business have you here between the towers? You belong in the tower. You should be locked away in the tower, for you block the way for one who is better than you." And with each word he came closer and closer to him. But when he was only one step behind him, the terrifying thing occurred that struck every mouth silent and forced all eyes to stare. He let out a yell like a devil and leaped over the man who was in his way. This man, seeing his rival triumph in this manner, lost his head and the rope. He threw away his pole and plunged into the depths even faster than his pole, like a whirlwind of arms and legs. The marketplace and the people resembled the sea when a storm charges in. Everyone fled apart and into one another, and especially in the spot where the body had to impact. But Zarathustra stood still, and the body landed right beside him, badly beaten and broken, but not yet dead. After a while, the shattered man regained consciousness and saw Zarathustra kneeling beside him. "What are you doing here?" he said finally. "I've known for a long time that the devil would trip me up. Now he is going to drag me off to hell. Are you going to stop him?" Here we also have the introduction of the jester, another archetype identified with Nietzsche and Zarathustra. This is also proven by a previous line of Zarathustra. I quote, "But they think me cold and a mocker with terrible jests." It is also, of course, a very general rule of thumb in Jungian psychology and dream analysis that the characters are often representations of yourself. However, this can be further proven by a diagram Jung made. The jester here is the shadow of the ropedancer and Nietzsche. The shadow is deeper than this esoterically, but is generally known as the negative or evil or hidden unconscious aspects of oneself. The jester in this passage represents the hidden darker side of the overman philosophy and reveals perfectly what the darker side of Nietzsche's philosophy is. The jester, shadow, causing the rope dancer to fall and become a corpse. With the overman, Nietzsche only really comments on the positive aspect of this philosophy. So the jester represents a very powerful shadow side to Nietzsche's philosophy. That is the issue that one cannot become God and simply create their own values and morals. One can even see this darker aspect in the now playing out with the rotten fruit of postmodernism, that morals and meta-narratives are innately meaningless alongside a naive idealism, that is, one can construct reality in any which way, similarly as the overman would. See our video on Jung vs. Nietzsche, Can We Create Our Own Values, for a further explanation. Constant headaches, constant vomiting, all my old ills are back again, wrapped up in a nervous exhaustion which renders the entire machine useless. I am not suffering from a disease of the brain. Nietzsche compares himself to a machine here, which is common in psychotic disorders, but most particularly schizophrenia. As one schizophrenic patient put it, "I am only an automaton, a machine. It is not I who senses, speaks, eats, suffers, sleeps. I exist no longer. I do not exist. I am dead. I feel I am absolutely nothing. I am not alive. I cannot move. I have no mind and no feelings. I have never existed. People only thought I did." One can see how Nietzsche is driven insane through his possession of Zarathustra. You see, Nietzsche certainly does not believe in God any longer. He thinks he is done with that. God is dead. And then here is another overestimation of the spirit, just as good as any Christian one. Without questioning, he identifies with Zarathustra. He personifies him, calls him a different name. Nietzsche knows he is not Zarathustra, yet he nevertheless identifies instead of treating Zarathustra as a demon or at least a disembodied spirit. The possession of Zarathustra was entirely engulfing. Nietzsche creating his new God and his detachment from the body can be seen in this passage from Zarathustra. "And when I saw my devil, I found him serious, thorough, profound, solemn. He was the spirit of gravity. Through him all things fall. Not by wrath, but by laughter do we slay. Come, let us slay the spirit of gravity. I learned to walk, since then have I let myself run. I learned to fly, since then I do not need pushing in order to move from a spot. Now I am light, now do I fly, now do I see myself under myself, now there danceth a God in me." In Jungian terms, the great psychic inflation is demonstrated by his flying and getting away from the earth, a common theme in Zarathustra even. His flight is also intertwined with depictions of the wise old man, who must fly to avoid psychic inflation as mentioned in the previous video. This dancing of the god is also intertwined with destruction, Shiva of course being the destroyer and the dancer. In this case, Nietzsche is destroyed. He sees the restriction of the body as the devil and demonstrates his identification with his new god, Zarathustra, the bodiless god of Nietzsche's philosophy. One can also see precisely here how Zarathustra fits this devilish jester figure and rope dancer figure, the latter through the mentioning of the spirit of gravity causing one to fall and the dancing of this god in him. You see, Nietzsche had unconsciously predicted his own death and insanity throughout Zarathustra. This character of the rope dancer and jester are a bidding of his own doom, but he could not realize it. The reality was that if one tries to create their own values and usurp God, whatever God may be, you fall from the sky and land dreadfully on the earth. That is hitting reality. Jung comments on this passage here. Here he really demonstrates the psychological process going on in him, the preparation for insanity. It is a very frequent symptom in the beginning of certain forms of insanity that people have a very peculiar relationship to their own body. They often have the idea, for example, that the body has no weight, that they cannot hear their own footfall. They also think they can fly and make attempts at flying, thus accounting for what is being supposed to be suicide in many cases. They climb out of the fourth story and naturally, following the law of gravity, they land on the pavement, and as they cannot explain what they really attempted, it is called a case of suicide from unsound mind, or they attempt to walk on the water and then they are drowned. Throughout Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Nietzsche was completely identified with Zarathustra and unconscious of himself. Again, one can see other quotes where he predicted his own fatal end. But the worst enemy you can meet will always be yourself. You lie in wait for yourself in caverns and forests. Lonely one, you are going the way to yourself, and your way goes past yourself and past your 7 devils. You will be a heretic to yourself and witch and soothsayer and fool and doubter and unholy one and villain. You must be ready to burn yourself in your own flame. How could you become new if you had not first become ashes? Of course, lonely Nietzsche did become ashes. He left his body, he left the thing grounding him to earth and matter, but there was no rebirth. He became the ghost of his former self. Jung comments further. Well, when a man consists of ashes, he is a disembodied spirit. Nietzsche thought that Zarathustra had been the inventor of the great conflict between good and evil, and that he had influenced the whole mental evolution of the world by this most fundamental concept. And his idea was that he ought now to come back again in order to improve on his former invention. Something should be done about the insupportable conflict between good and evil, because the old Christian point of view, represented by the old man in the wood, as seen in the previous video of this series, was no longer valid. It is common in psychotic disorders including schizophrenia that a loss of relations with the body and its senses occurs. As Ronald Lang wrote in his book, The Divided Self, describing a characteristic experience of psychotics, the body is felt more as one object among other objects in the world than as the core of the individual's own being. Instead of being the core of his true self, the body is felt as the core of a false self, which a detached, disembodied, inner, true self looks on at with tenderness, amusement, or hatred, as the case may be. It is especially strange to see in Nietzsche this flight from the earth and into Zarathustra, since his philosophy was heavily predicated on the body, instincts, the animalistic and more primordial aspects of man, including Dionysus. Of course, though, the overman was overly idealistic and not an embodied philosophy. Who, after all, could create their own values? Thank you for watching. The next video, part 3, will cover more about Nietzsche as the human being, what he was like, and where he screwed up in his life and his philosophy, which led him to his insanity and his early death.